Welcome back to Carneades.org. Today we're going to be continuing with our series, Dumbfounding Definitions, Dizzying Distinctions, and Diabolical Doctrines, a series sorting through some of the jargon of philosophy. In this video, we're going to be looking at the question, what is a strong argument? And note, we're using strong here in the very strict logical sense of strong, not in the colloquial, that's a pretty good argument sense. So, as we've said before, we have broadly deductive and inductive arguments. You have, within deductive arguments, you have valid arguments and sound arguments. Inductive arguments are arguments which the premises claim to provide support for the likelihood of the conclusion. They don't claim to guarantee the conclusion, but they claim to make it more likely. Strong arguments are arguments where those premises actually do make the conclusion more likely. And cogent arguments are strong arguments with true premises. So a strong argument is an inductive argument where the truth of the premises makes the truth of the conclusion more likely, but not guaranteed. It would be a valid argument if they were guaranteed. Note that strong and cogent are less commonly used, and there is some disagreement on how to define them due to issues we're going to cover in the end. But broadly, if you look at most philosophy textbooks, you'll run into this definition of strong being the premises make the conclusion more likely. So, let's look at this argument. 90% of balls in this bag are yellow. Chopper is picking a ball out of the bag at random. Therefore, Chopper will pick a yellow ball. It's inductive. Note that the premises couldn't guarantee the truth of that conclusion, but they seem to make it more likely. If 90% of the balls in the bag are yellow, and Chopper's picking a ball at random, he's probably going to pick a yellow ball. And it's a strong argument. The premises, if they're true, actually do make the conclusion more likely. Or is it? On closer examination, it should be clear that there's something wrong with this argument and with the idea of strong arguments entirely. It's not because of the argument itself, but because of a flaw in the very concept of a strong or a cogent argument, which is one of the reasons they are not as commonly used terms in philosophy as valid and sound. That such an argument is dependent on what might be called your priors. What do we mean by that? Well, let's take a look. A strong argument claims to be one for which the premises make the conclusion more likely. However, as more likely is comparative, the sensible question to ask is more likely than what? The answer hidden by the idea of a strong argument is that this depends on your priors, or your prior beliefs about the premises and the conclusion. Depending on your prior beliefs, a given argument could make a conclusion more likely, or could make it less likely. So, for example, imagine that before being presented with this argument, you believed that all of the balls in the bag were yellow, and that Chopper's picking a ball out of the bag at random. This would mean that being presented with the premise that only 90% of them are yellow would make the conclusion less likely, not more, and therefore this would be a weak argument, not a strong one. Alternatively, imagine that previously you believed that Chopper was purposely selecting a yellow ball, and you believe the first premise that 90% of the balls in the bag are yellow. Finding out that he is selecting one at random would once again make the conclusion less, not more likely. Therefore, whether or not this is a weak argument depends on your prior beliefs about the premises and the conclusion. Therefore, no argument can really be said to be strong or weak, absent context of your prior beliefs. Now, this gets into something known as Bayesian Epistemology. We're not going to cover that very complex topic here, but if you're curious about these kinds of issues of the logical frameworks for inductive arguments dealing with the probabilities and degrees of belief, and how you're kind of logically committed to changing your degrees of belief as certain arguments appear, and a lot of the problems with that, and the problem of the priors, check out my big old series on Bayesian Epistemology. Next up, we'll be looking at what is a cogent argument. Watch this video and more here at Carneades.org, and stay skeptical, everybody.